The mist over the Bosphorus hung thick and silver, muffling the sound of oars and the cries of gulls. In the heart of old Constantinople, at the Pera Palace Hotel, a murder had occurred that even the seasoned Turkish constabulary could not make sense of. The victim was Count Alexei Voronov, a Russian nobleman known for his charm, his secrets, and his tendency to vanish for weeks at a time. He had been found dead inside his locked suite, room 214, with a single wound to the chest, his face turned toward the window overlooking the Golden Horn. The door had been bolted from the inside, and the only window was too small for any man to pass through. Yet, according to the bellboy who discovered him, the Count had been seen alive only minutes before his death. It was the concierge, a wiry man named Kamal, who had sent the urgent telegram to London. Its recipient, Hercule Poirot, had just concluded a case in Athens and was preparing to return home when the message arrived. "Impossible murder, only you can explain. Come at once. The phantom walks again." The phrase intrigued Poirot more than the crime itself. A phantom in Constantinople. He smiled, adjusted his tie, and boarded the next steamer north. When he arrived, the police were waiting. Inspector Selim Arda, tall, deliberate, his moustache almost a challenge to Poirot's own. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted, "you arrive at a time of great confusion. We have a corpse, a locked room, and witnesses who swear to the impossible." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "Then, mon ami, we shall bring order to your confusion." The corridor outside room 214 still smelled faintly of tobacco and lavender. Inside, the curtains swayed, though the windows were closed. Poirot surveyed the body with quiet precision. The Count's silk dressing gown had been torn at the shoulder, and a thin blade, too narrow for a knife, too fine for a dagger, had pierced his heart. On the table lay a half-finished letter written in French. "She will come at midnight. If I refuse her, she will—" The sentence ended abruptly, the ink smeared by what might have been the tremor of death. Poirot turned his attention to the peculiar detail that every policeman had already noted. At the edge of the carpet near the writing desk was a single white feather, long and curved. It seemed utterly out of place. "A feather," muttered Arda. "Perhaps from a pillow?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, from a bird of prey. Falcon, perhaps. But what is it doing here, in this nest of velvet and perfume?" The Count's valet, a thin, nervous man named Petrov, claimed he had left his master alive at 11 o'clock the previous night. He had been instructed to fetch wine from the cellar, and when he returned 15 minutes later, the door would not open. "I knocked, monsieur, but there was no answer. I thought perhaps the Count had gone to sleep." Only in the morning had the staff broken the door open, finding the Count, cold and lifeless. The doctor confirmed the time of death near midnight, the same hour mentioned in the unfinished letter. Poirot examined the bolt. It was sturdy, undamaged, impossible to manipulate from outside. He studied the windows, latched, untouched, and then the floor, where the faintest trace of soot led toward the hearth. Stooping, he noticed the fireplace grate had been disturbed, the ashes unevenly spread. "You have perhaps a chimney sweep in your hotel?" Poirot asked the concierge. "Not at this hour," the man replied uneasily. "But, monsieur, you do not think someone came through the chimney?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, mon ami, in murder, everything is to be thought of until it is proven impossible." He requested to see the other guests on that floor. Among them was Lady Eleanor Faversham, an English widow who had arrived from Cairo 2 days earlier, wearing black lace and a face too pale for the Mediterranean sun. She had dined with the Count that evening, according to witnesses, and had returned to her room just before 11. "We spoke of old times," she told Poirot, her voice trembling slightly. "I knew him from Odessa, years ago. He was kind once, before greed and politics changed him. I did not see him again after dinner." Another guest, an Armenian merchant named Darius Melkin, claimed he had seen a woman in white pass through the corridor near midnight, her footsteps silent, her veil trailing like smoke. "She went toward the Count's door, I swear it," he said. "When I stepped forward to speak, she was gone, vanished." The police had found no trace of such a woman, and no one else had seen her. Poirot remained thoughtful. A phantom woman, a feather of a falcon, a locked door, and a dying man who writes of one coming at midnight. "Tell me, Inspector, does this Count's suite have a connecting vent above the fireplace?" Arda frowned. "It leads to the suite above, yes, but that room is empty. It was locked when we searched." Poirot requested the key. In the upper room, a fine layer of dust covered most of the floor except near the vent. A faint impression of a knee, a heel, and the edge of a small ladder were visible. Someone had descended through the chimney, entered the Count's room unseen, and escaped the same way. But who? The soot trail matched the mark Poirot had noted below. He smiled faintly. Our phantom has wings of soot, not spirit. Back in the Count's suite, Poirot examined the feather once more under the lamplight. It was not natural. It was carved from ivory, tipped with silver, a decorative piece from a woman's hairpin. And near the window, half hidden beneath the rug, he found the missing fragment, the silver tip bent and scorched by flame. Mon cher, he said softly, she came at midnight indeed. Lady Eleanor was brought once more to the lounge. Poirot spoke gently. Madame, I believe the Count wronged you long ago, n'est-ce pas? And that you returned to demand what was yours. Her eyes flickered with panic. You cannot prove, non, madame, but perhaps you dropped this. He placed the broken hairpin on the table. She froze, pale as marble. He promised me freedom, she whispered. Then he mocked me. I wanted to frighten him, not kill. Poirot inclined his head. You entered by the chimney, wearing a costume from the masquerade, a ghost in white, the phantom of his sins. When he laughed, you struck in anger, not knowing your little blade would find his heart. You escaped the same way, leaving behind the feather that betrayed you. Tears welled in her eyes. It was meant to be justice. Poirot sighed softly. Justice, madam, comes not from fire or feathers, but from truth. As the dawn broke over the city, the call to prayer echoed across the water. Poirot watched from his balcony, the minarets glowing like spears of light. There are no phantoms in Constantinople, he murmured, only the ghosts of our own making. Poirot's keen eyes never rested for long. Even as Inspector Arda prepared his official report, Poirot moved slowly about the room, his gaze skimming over every surface as if reading a language written in dust and shadow. The air in room 214 still carried the faint scent of perfume and burnt paper. The Count's body had already been taken away, yet the impression of his presence lingered. His habits, his fears, his secrets, all waiting to be interpreted by the detective's quiet precision. Observe, my friend, Poirot murmured, crouching near the fireplace once more. Your constables have done their work well, perhaps too well. They have tidied the chaos, and murder, Inspector, is never tidy. Arda frowned but said nothing. Poirot lifted a small shard of glass from the carpet, holding it delicately between finger and thumb. It was thin, curved, and faintly blue. A piece from a bottle, Arda suggested. Perhaps perfume. Poirot examined it under the lamplight. Perhaps, yes, but not the Count's. He wore a cologne of Russian tobacco, strong, masculine. This, however, comes from something floral, something French. He rose, stepping toward the writing desk where the half-written letter still lay. The blotter beneath it bore faint smudges, 2 overlapping shapes. Poirot fetched his pocket magnifier and smiled faintly. Do you see, mon ami? 2 hands wrote upon this desk last night. One large and angular, yes, the Count's, but the other, delicate, smaller, pressed lightly here. He pointed to a faint indentation beside the ink pot. A woman sat here, and recently. She held the pen, perhaps guided it, yet her writing does not appear in the letter. What does that tell us? Arda hesitated. That she came willingly? Poirot nodded. Or that he made her write something and then destroyed it. His eyes wandered toward the window again. The curtain stirred slightly, though no wind entered. Poirot followed their motion and discovered a small metal clasp on the inner frame. He tested it. It clicked softly. You see? A secret latch. This window may appear locked, but if one knows the trick... With a deft movement he released it and the window swung inward. Voila! The ghost could come and go, yet leave no mark of entry. Arda's eyes widened. You think someone entered that way? Poirot shook his head gently. Not entered. Watched. Perhaps listened. Murder is often born of overheard words, not acts. As they examined the courtyard below, the hotel's night porter appeared at the door, bowing awkwardly. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Arda, there is a guest who insists upon speaking with you, a Miss Nadia Volkova. She says she knew the Count. Poirot exchanged a quick glance with the inspector. Let us hear what the lady has to say." The woman who entered was striking, tall, with pale hair bound in silver pins and eyes that seemed too calm for grief. Her dress was simple but finely made, and a faint scent of lilies drifted as she moved. "I was a friend to Alexei," she said softly. "We were to meet yesterday evening, but he sent word cancelling. When I came this morning and heard—" Her voice faltered briefly, a practised tremor. Poirot watched her with polite attention, noting the absence of mourning in her posture. "Mademoiselle," he said, "did the Count ever speak of receiving threats, or of someone seeking him?" Her gaze flicked toward the inspector. "The Count had many debts, monsieur, and many enemies, but ghosts? No, I do not believe in those." Poirot smiled faintly. "Nor I, yet someone believed enough to become one." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Mademoiselle Volkova, did you know Lady Eleanor Faversham?" The faintest pause, a breath too long. "I have seen her," she said carefully. "A widow, yes. She followed the Count like a shadow. But he had grown tired of her. I warned him she would not let go." Ada scribbled a note, but Poirot's mind was already elsewhere. "And you, mademoiselle, were you fond of the Count?" Her lips curved in something like amusement. "Fondness is for schoolgirls. I respected him. He knew things I required." Poirot tilted his head. "Information? Let us say, documents." That word caught the inspector's ear. "Documents of what nature?" she shrugged. "Something political, perhaps. He hinted it might concern the embassy. But now—" She spread her gloved hands. "Now all is ashes." Poirot's eyes darted once more to the fireplace. "Ah," he murmured, "ashes indeed." He walked over, taking the poker and stirring gently. Among the charred remains, something small glinted faintly. With a handkerchief, Poirot lifted it out, a gold locket, scorched but intact. When he opened it, a miniature portrait stared back, a young woman laughing with a white feather in her hair. "The phantom leaves her signature again," Poirot said softly. He held the locket out toward Miss Volkova. "Do you recognize this?" Her composure faltered for the first time. "No," she said too quickly. Poirot's brows rose slightly. "No? And yet I see your initials, N.V., engraved inside the clasp." Her eyes hardened. "Then you see more than is there." She turned sharply to Ada. "Am I under suspicion?" Poirot interjected mildly. "No, mademoiselle, only under observation." When she left, the inspector exhaled. "She lies," he said flatly. "Yes," Poirot replied, "but not about everything. The Count's death touches not only the heart, it touches power." He placed the locket upon the desk beside the feather and the glass shard. "A lady in black, a lady in white, and now a lady of silver. 3 women orbiting one man, and somewhere between them lies our truth." He paced slowly toward the mirror near the door. The surface bore a faint smudge at its lower edge, shaped like the curve of a palm. "He stood here before dying," Poirot murmured. "Or someone did, watching themselves, straightening, preparing. Murder is an act, Inspector, like the theatre. Each player rehearses their role, but the mirror, it remembers the last gesture." Ada looked uncertain. "You believe one of these women returned after the murder?" Poirot tapped his temple gently. "Non, my friend. I believe one never left." As night deepened over the city, Poirot sat alone in the lounge, sipping Turkish coffee and arranging his thoughts. The feather, the perfume, the letter cut short, each a fragment of something larger. Outside, the Bosphorus shimmered like glass. Poirot's reflection flickered upon it, and for a moment it seemed the detective was looking not into water, but into memory itself, piecing together what had been done in silence, by a hand that trembled not from fear, but from love turned cold. The next morning dawned dimly over Constantinople, the light filtering through the haze that hung above the Golden Horn like the residue of unspoken secrets. The Pera Palace was unusually quiet, its marble corridors muffled with the hush that follows scandal. Hercule Poirot sat in the breakfast salon, a delicate porcelain cup before him, untouched. His gaze lingered on the reflection of the chandeliers in the glass tabletop, each crystal hanging perfectly symmetrical. To Poirot, symmetry was truth, and in this affair, truth was disturbingly askew. Inspector Ada joined him shortly after 8, his expression weary but alert. "We've spoken with the staff again," he said, setting a small notebook on the table. "Nothing new? No one saw or heard anyone enter room 214 after 11. Poirot's moustache twitched ever so slightly. "Ah, mon cher Arda, but you forget. To see nothing and to hear nothing is itself a most suspicious coincidence." Arda frowned. "You mean someone is lying?" "I mean," said Poirot gently, "that someone has told us only the portion of the truth that flatters their conscience." He requested that the key witnesses be gathered once more in the hotel lounge, the concierge Kemal, the valet Petrov, Lady Eleanor Faversham, and Miss Nadia Volkova. The gathering was uneasy, the air heavy with the kind of tension that often precedes confession or collapse. Poirot, seated at the centre, looked less like an accuser and more like a conductor preparing to draw music from a discordant orchestra. He began with Petrov, the valet. The man's hands trembled as he clutched his cap. "You say, monsieur," Poirot began, "that you left your master at 11 o'clock to fetch wine. When you returned, the door was bolted, yes?" "Yes, monsieur," Petrov stammered. "He said he wished to be alone. Always, he said that." "And you fetched the wine?" "I did, monsieur, from the cellar." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet you returned empty-handed. The bellboy swears he saw you come up without a bottle." Petrov's face paled. I could not find the brand he wanted. I meant to return later." "Later? And yet you did not." Poirot's tone remained mild. "You see, my friend, it is a small thing. Too small, perhaps. But murder often hides behind such smallness. Tell me, what was it you feared to find when you came back?" Petrov's lips parted, but no answer came. He looked helplessly toward the inspector, muttered something about loyalty and fell silent. Poirot observed him quietly, noting the beads of sweat on his forehead, the darting of his eyes toward the two women seated nearby. "Très bien," he murmured. "We shall let that rest, for now." He turned his attention to Kemal, the concierge. The man was proud, precise, and visibly irritated at being questioned again. "Monsieur Poirot, I have told everything. The Count was a man of mystery. I served him, yes, but from a distance. He paid well, he tipped better, and he trusted no one." Poirot nodded, seemingly satisfied, then asked, "And yet, you sent the telegram for help before the doctor even confirmed death. A curious haste, no?" Kemal blinked. "Because it was clear the Count was dead." "But you did not enter the room yourself. You relied on the bellboy's word." "I trust my staff," Kemal snapped. Poirot smiled faintly, as one must. "But tell me, did you also trust the guests who paid you to forget what you saw?" Kemal froze, his expression shifting just slightly, the way marble seems to shift when the light changes. "I see many things, monsieur," he said stiffly, "but I sell discretion, not gossip." Poirot inclined his head. "A noble profession, but beware, my friend. Silence can also be a confession." Lady Eleanor Faversham had been watching all this with the cool detachment of someone accustomed to scrutiny. When Poirot finally addressed her, she smiled faintly as though humouring a child. "You wish to hear my story again, monsieur? I fear it grows no more interesting with repetition." "Ah, madame," said Poirot with a twinkle, "but perhaps it grows more accurate." Her smile tightened. "Very well. I dined with the Count, we quarrelled, I returned to my room, I heard nothing unusual. And yet the waiter says you returned to the dining room later near midnight." Her eyes flickered. "I needed a glass of water. The air in these hotels is dreadful." "A glass of water that required you to walk through the same corridor as the Count's door?" "I did not stop there." "No, madame, but you paused, did you not? Just long enough to listen?" Her knuckles whitened against her handbag. Poirot leaned back, his tone light. "It is human to linger by the door of a man one loved, even if that love has soured. But what is not human, madame, is the silence afterward. You heard something, I think. Perhaps a voice not his own." Her gaze darted momentarily toward Miss Volkova before she composed herself again. "You're mistaken, monsieur." Poirot smiled. "I often am, until the last 5 minutes." Nadia Volkova shifted in her chair. Her gloved hands rested calmly in her lap, but her jaw was tight, her pulse visible at her throat. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "last night you told us the Count cancelled your meeting, and yet the porter saw you leaving his floor at 10:45. How do we reconcile these two truths?" She did not look at him. "He changed his mind. He asked me to bring him something, a letter." "Ah, yes. The mysterious documents you mentioned. Did you deliver them? Yes. And did he read them in your presence? Her voice faltered. No. He said he would read them later. He seemed afraid. Poirot observed her with careful stillness. Afraid of what, do you think? Of a woman, she whispered. There was a pause so complete that even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Which woman, mademoiselle? Her eyes flicked toward Lady Eleanor just for an instant, and then away. I do not know. Poirot clasped his hands, his expression unreadable. So, each of you brings a small truth wrapped in deception. The valet who forgets his errand, the concierge who sells silence, the lady who walks at midnight for water, the other who brings letters but not explanations. He rose slowly. The Count was surrounded by liars, mes amis, and yet he was the greatest liar of all. I think perhaps he expected death. Inspector Arda looked startled. Expected it? You mean he... Poirot raised a finger. Not suicide. No. No. A man like Alexei Voronov never takes his own life. But he knew the hand that would strike him. He knew it long before last night. He walked to the window, glancing again at the rooftops and chimneys beyond. Somewhere in this tale there is a woman who came and went, unseen. The phantom, as your telegram called her. But she is no ghost. She walks among us still, breathing, waiting, pretending innocence, and like all phantoms, she has left behind echoes. Poirot turned back toward them, his eyes gleaming in the half-light. We shall listen for those echoes, in the lies you have told, and the ones you have not yet dared to tell. The silence that followed was taut as wire. Outside, the faint call of prayer drifted from a distant minaret, haunting the morning air. And somewhere within the walls of the Pera Palace, the truth stirred, not yet ready to be seen, but unable to stay buried much longer. The day stretched long and heavy, filled with whispers and muted footsteps along the marbled corridors of the Pera Palace. Poirot spent the morning in measured silence, his eyes thoughtful beneath the thin veil of cigarette smoke curling from his slender holder. Outside, the muezzin's call drifted through the city like a thread of melancholy, weaving through the fog and the scent of coffee. Inside, however, the air felt charged, not with prayer, but with fear. Inspector Arda entered the room bearing the latest report. We have examined the Count's financial ledgers, he said. They're in disarray. Gambling debts, blackmail payments, coded transactions. He was playing a dangerous game. Poirot nodded slightly. Ah, yes, the eternal triad of vice. Greed, passion, and pride. But tell me, mon ami, which of these do you believe killed him? Arda hesitated. Perhaps all three. Poirot smiled faintly. Then we must begin to untangle the rope before it strangles the truth. He rose and began pacing the salon, his small polished shoes tapping softly against the marble. Let us examine our tableau once more. Lady Eleanor, the widow, moved by jealousy, oui, a woman whose affection was scorned. She has motive and perhaps courage. Mademoiselle Volkova, the political intriguer. She brings documents, she lies about the hour of her visit, and yet she fears something greater than guilt. The valet Petrov, he hides more than incompetence, perhaps loyalty to another, and the concierge, who knows when to see and when not to see. Each thread touches the Count, yet none explain the locked door, the soot upon the hearth, or the feather carved from ivory. Arda leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. You think the motive is not of the heart, then? Poirot paused before answering. Ah, but everything begins with the heart, Inspector. Even betrayal wears perfume. He returned to the desk where he had laid the collected objects like relics, the broken hairpin, the locket, the feather, the blue shard of glass. He studied them in silence, then spoke softly as if to the dead man himself. You feared her, did you not, mon pauvre comte? You wrote of it, you expected her, and yet you allowed her in. Arda frowned. Her? Which one? Poirot did not reply. Instead, he beckoned for Lady Eleanor to be brought back. When she entered, she carried herself with forced dignity, her black lace veil carefully arranged. Poirot gestured for her to sit. Madame, I must trouble you once more. You told us you dined with the Count, quarrelled, and returned to your room, but you did not mention what the quarrel concerned. She exhaled, her gloved fingers tightening. It was about money, she said at last. He had promised to repay me. I financed his last business venture, A shipment of jewels from Odessa, but he'd squandered it all. When I demanded my due, he laughed, said the jewels were already gone. Poirot's eyes glimmered. Ah, money, the dullest yet most efficient cause of murder. But you see, madame, the jewels were not gone. They were stolen. By him, she blinked. What do you mean? Poirot reached into his pocket and drew out the small blue shard. This came from a bottle, yes, but not of perfume. It was a glass vial once used to smuggle gems, hollow, sealed with wax, the kind favoured by couriers who do not wish to be searched. Her breath caught, her face paling beneath the veil. Then he tricked me. Tricked, yes, but not only you. Poirot turned away, his tone sharpening. Inspector, summon Mademoiselle Volkova. When Nadia Volkova entered, her poise had faded. She looked sleepless, her eyes shadowed with unease. Monsieur Poirot, she began, I have already told you all I know. He smiled kindly. No, mademoiselle. You have told me all you wish to be known. There is a difference. He set the locket on the table before her. You said this was not yours, yet your initials adorn it, and the portrait within shows a woman very like you, younger, happier. Tell me, was it not a gift from the Count? She lowered her gaze. It was long ago, before he left Russia. We were lovers once. Ah, Poirot murmured. Then the letter you brought him, it was not business? Her eyes flashed. It was both. He held something against me, a document I could not allow to surface. He promised to return it if I helped him move certain valuables through the embassy, but when I came last night he mocked me, said he had already made other arrangements. Ah, said Poirot softly, a dangerous man to mock, and yet you left him alive. Her voice trembled. Yes, alive, but afraid. Poirot leaned closer. Afraid of whom? Nadia hesitated, then whispered, The Englishwoman. He said she had followed him from Cairo, that she knew everything. Lady Eleanor's veil quivered as she drew a sharp breath. He was lying, she cried. He blamed me for what he'd done to her. I only wanted what was mine. Enough, said Poirot quietly. We speak not of blame, but of truth. The Count played both of you against each other. You, madame, for your money, you, mademoiselle, for your silence. But still, there remains one piece. Missing. He turned to Ada. The valet. Where is he now? Gone, said the inspector grimly. He left the hotel an hour ago, took a carriage to the docks. Poirot's expression darkened. Bon Dieu. Then he runs not from fear, but from guilt. Moments later, Poirot and Ada were in pursuit, their carriage rattling down the cobbled streets toward Galata. The fog had thickened, swallowing the lamps in soft halos of light. Down by the harbour the air reeked of salt and tar. At the pier, they found Petrov loading a crate onto a small boat. "Hold there!" Ada called. The man froze, the crate slipping from his grip. It fell open, spilling not wine bottles but dozens of tiny glass vials, identical to the blue shard Poirot had found. Each one glittered faintly with the glint of hidden stones. Petrov turned. Panic etched across his face. "I did not kill him," he shouted. "He was dead when I returned." Poirot's voice was calm, almost gentle. "But you stole from him, yes? You took what he could no longer spend." Tears streaked the man's face. "He forced me to smuggle them. Said if I refused he would have me arrested. I thought only to take my share. When I went back he was already cold." Poirot regarded him steadily. "And you left the door locked behind you?" The valet nodded miserably. "Yes, to make it seem as he wished, to keep out the phantom." Poirot exhaled softly. So, the thief, the lover, the widow, all bound by one man's deceit, yet none truly his murderer. Ada frowned. Then who? Poirot looked back toward the city, where the faint light of the Pera Palace glimmered across the water. There remains one who has spoken least of all, one who sent the telegram with impossible speed, one who profits most when secrets are sold. The concierge, mon ami. He does not sell gossip, as he says. He trades in ghosts. And as the wind swept across the harbour, carrying with it the distant toll of a church bell, Poirot's mind closed around the final knot of the maze. Somewhere in those quiet marble halls the phantom still walked, not born of jealousy or greed, but of cunning, and before nightfall he meant to unmask it. The carriage wheels splashed through the rain-soaked streets, as Poirot and Inspector Arda returned to the Pera Palace. The scent of sea mist lingered on their coats, beneath it a heavier smell, fatigue, perhaps, or doubt. They had captured Petrov and his crate of hidden jewels, and word of the discovery had spread through the hotel like wildfire. Guests whispered in corridors, the staff exhaled in relief, and by evening the newspapers were already calling it the jewel murder at Pera Palace, solved in one night. Yet to Poirot, the triumph rang hollow. He watched as the police sealed the crates and loaded them into evidence wagons, while Inspector Arda, flushed with satisfaction, signed the official report. "It's all here," Arda said proudly. The motive, the proof, the confession. Petrov stole the jewels and killed his master to cover his theft. Simple as daylight. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the great staircase where shadows fell across the crimson carpet like spilled ink. "Ah, daylight. Yes," he murmured. "But you see, mon ami, daylight is a dangerous illusion. It blinds as easily as it reveals." Arda frowned. "You think he's lying?" "I think he tells the truth, just not the whole of it." Poirot's eyes glinted. "A murderer may confess to one sin to conceal another. It is an old trick, Inspector. But this man's guilt does not yet satisfy my little grey cells." Inside the lounge, the guests had gathered, whispering like a restless congregation. Lady Eleanor Faversham sat apart, her veil lowered. Miss Volkova stood by the piano, her hands clenched around a cup of untouched tea. Kamal, the concierge, hovered near the door, his usual composure shaken. Arda entered first, announcing the good news. "Ladies, you may rest easy now. The killer has been found. Count Voronov's valet has confessed to the theft and murder." Lady Eleanor exhaled sharply, a sound of relief or disbelief Poirot could not tell. "Then it's over?" she asked faintly. "For you, perhaps," Poirot said softly, stepping forward. "For the truth? Non." He approached the piano, his fingers tapping lightly along the polished surface. "Tell me, Mademoiselle Volkova, you heard of this confession, yes? Does it surprise you?" Her lips trembled before she replied, "I suppose not. Petrov was desperate, always afraid of losing favour. The Count treated him cruelly." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "And yet he was loyal enough to remain by his master's side for years, even after the debts and betrayals began. That kind of loyalty does not vanish overnight." He turned to Arda. "Where is the weapon, Inspector?" "The stiletto? In his room, hidden in a boot. Blood still fresh upon it." "Fresh?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, but the Count has been dead for nearly 24 hours. Blood congeals, it darkens. Yet this blade drips as though from a wound an hour old." Arda stiffened. "Perhaps he cleaned it." "Perhaps." Poirot's tone was neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "Or perhaps someone placed it there later. Someone who needed a convincing ending to a tale already growing dangerous." Kamal shifted uneasily near the door. Poirot's gaze flicked toward him like the swing of a compass needle. "Monsieur Kamal," he said gently, "you were the first to find the body, yes?" "Yes, monsieur. The bellboy came to me in panic. I fetched the master key, called the police and sent a telegram to London before they even arrived," Poirot finished. "You are efficient, my friend. Too efficient, perhaps. Tell me, how did you know the Count was dead?" Kamal hesitated, then smiled thinly. "The boy told me. He said the Count did not answer, that the door was locked. He feared something was wrong." Poirot nodded slowly. "And so you concluded, without entering, that a murder had occurred? Ah, a remarkable instinct. You would have made an excellent detective." Lady Eleanor looked from one to the other, her gloved hands tightening. "What are you implying, monsieur?" Poirot's voice softened, but his words cut cleanly. "That a man who profits from information will always know more than he should. And our Monsieur Kamal, he trades in secrets, not silence." Kamal's face hardened. "That is a lie." "Is it?" Poirot's tone remained calm. "Then tell me, how did you know the phrase, 'the phantom walks again'? Words found only in the Count's private letter, before the police even read it? Those were the words you used in your telegram to summon me." The concierge froze. For a moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock. Then he laughed, brittle and low. "It was a coincidence, monsieur. I heard rumours from the staff, superstitions." Poirot's smile was delicate, but his eyes were steel. "Ah, superstition, yes, a convenient veil. And yet, It tells me that someone entered that locked room before the authorities did. Someone who removed certain papers from the desk before help arrived. Ada's head snapped toward Kamal. Papers? What papers? Poirot's voice lowered. Letters, Inspector. The kind that can ruin diplomats and buy silence. The Count was selling more than jewels. He was selling information. And when he died, someone claimed his merchandise. Lady Eleanor rose, trembling. Then it wasn't Petrov who killed him? Perhaps he stole, yes, Poirot said. But murder? No. The knife was planted, the confession forced. And yet... He hesitated, frowning slightly as though a note of discord had entered the melody. There is still something that eludes me, a ghost that refuses to take shape. Ada straightened, bristling. Poirot, we have the killer, the motive, the evidence. Everything points to Petrov. Poirot turned away, looking toward the window where rain streaked the glass in fine threads. When everything points one way, Inspector, one must look the other. The truth, you see, does not shout, it whispers. The door burst open. A young constable entered, breathless. Inspector, you must come quickly. There's been another death. Ada stiffened. Where? In the servant quarters, the constable said, pale. Petrov, he's dead. For an instant the room went silent. Poirot's cigarette slipped slightly between his fingers, unlit. Then he said softly, Ah, so the phantom walks again. He turned toward the door, his voice low but clear. You see, my friend, a false confession is a fragile thing. It must be sealed with silence before the truth escapes. The guests stared, frozen between fear and disbelief. Poirot stepped past them, his expression darkened by certainty. Come, Inspector, the curtain has risen for the final act and the true killer has just entered the stage. The narrow servant corridor was dimly lit, the air thick with the damp chill of stone and the faint tang of iron. Poirot and Inspector Ada arrived to find a cluster of constables gathered around Petrov's lifeless body. He lay slumped near the foot of the stairwell, eyes wide, mouth slightly open as though death had come upon him mid-protest. A faint smear of blood stained his collar, but there was no weapon to be found. Only an empty vial on the ground beside him, glass, curved, tinted faintly blue. Poirot bent to examine it, his brow knitting. So, he murmured, our phantom silences the man who confessed. How very thorough. Ada swore under his breath. The poisoner's work. He was fed something before we reached him. Or after, Poirot said softly. The killer moves among us still, Inspector. Perhaps even now, watching, listening. He turned to the constables. Seal the stairway. No one enters or leaves. And you, Ada, fetch me the register of guests from 5 years past. The inspector blinked. 5 years? What use could that be? Poirot's voice was distant, as though he were following a thought too fragile to speak aloud. You remember, mon ami, when I said the Count expected death? That expectation was not born last night. It began long ago. I must know who else once walked these halls. By dawn the rain had stopped. The Pera Palace stood quiet again, its corridors gleaming faintly under gaslight. Poirot sat alone in the smoking lounge, the hotel's ledgers open before him. Names, dates, signatures, all meticulously recorded. He turned the brittle pages with care, pausing now and then to trace a familiar name. Then suddenly he stopped. There, written in the same elegant hand that had signed the Count's final letter, was a booking from 1919. Alexei Voronov, Suite 214. Below it, another name appeared, registered 3 days later, Eleanor Marsh Faversham, and below hers, Nadia Volkova. Ah, Poirot breathed. Les ombres du passé, the shadows returned to dance. When Inspector Ada entered, Poirot was already standing by the window, staring out at the Bosphorus where the first hint of dawn shimmered on the water. Do you know, Inspector, what occurred in this hotel 6 years ago? Ada frowned. A political scandal, wasn't it? A Russian diplomat found dead in his room. Officially ruled suicide. Officially, Poirot echoed. But unofficially the matter was hushed. And the room, ah yes, the same room in which Count Voronov has now met his end. Ada's eyes widened. You think the two cases are connected? I think, my friend, that they are the same story, written twice. The first with ink, the second with blood. Poirot laid out the register. The diplomat was Sergei Volkova, brother to our Mademoiselle Nadia. He died. In room 214, under circumstances most mysterious, the investigation was quieted, too quiet. And who was here at that time? The Count, the widow, the sister. History repeats itself, Inspector, because we failed to read the first act carefully enough. Ada leaned closer, studying the names. Then Nadia lied when she said she met the Count only recently. Lied, yes, but perhaps not entirely out of guilt. There is loyalty in that lie. The question is, to whom? At that moment a constable entered bearing a small object wrapped in cloth. Found this near the back stairs, monsieur. Poirot took it, unwrapping it slowly. Inside lay a silver locket identical to the one found in the Count's fireplace, except this one bore a different inscription. Inside, a miniature photograph showed two figures, a young man in uniform smiling faintly, and a girl beside him with bright eyes and a feather in her hair. Nadia and her brother. Poirot's expression darkened. So she kept his likeness all these years, and yet another copy was hidden by the Count. That tells us much, Inspector. The dead do not forget, and neither do the betrayed. Later that morning, Poirot requested both women join him in the lounge. Lady Eleanor arrived first, her movements precise, deliberate. Nadia came moments later, pale and visibly shaken. The silence between them was brittle. Poirot motioned for them to sit. "Madame," he began quietly, "you both knew the Count far longer than you have admitted, and both have lied to protect something buried deep beneath this affair. It is time, I think, to uncover it." Nadia's voice was the first to break. "You do not understand, monsieur. My brother was no traitor. They said he sold secrets to the Turks, but it was Alexei who used him. He gave Sergei the documents, false ones, then denounced him when the British discovered the deception." Her hands trembled. "They called it treason. He was shot in that very room." Poirot nodded slowly. "And you have waited all these years for justice." Her eyes glistened. "I did not kill him. I only wanted the truth known." Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor, who sat perfectly still, her gloved fingers intertwined. "And you, madame, what truth do you hide?" She looked away. "I knew of Sergei's death," she said quietly. "I was in Constantinople then, married to the attaché who investigated the case. My husband told me the Russian woman was guilty. He admired her courage, her silence." She hesitated, her gaze lowering. "When he died, I sought out the Count myself. I wanted to know the truth." He laughed. "Said my husband had been a fool, that everyone in this city served someone's game." Poirot's voice softened. "And did he tell you that Sergei Volkova's final words named not his sister, but the woman who delivered the fatal order?" Eleanor's face blanched. "He told you that?" "No, madame, you just did." For a long time, no one spoke. Outside, the morning light shifted, falling across the floor in long bars. Poirot moved toward the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "You see, it was never merely theft or passion. It was retribution, slow, deliberate, inevitable. Each of you played your part. The sister returning to confront the man who destroyed her family. The widow seeking to silence the only witness who could expose her husband's guilt. And between you both, Voronov, who thought himself clever enough to profit from tragedy." Ada's brow furrowed. "Then which of them killed him?" Poirot looked thoughtful. "That, Inspector, is the beauty of this puzzle. The hand that struck was guided by two hearts, not one. But one of them, still lies to us." He turned back to the women, his tone suddenly sharp. "When Petrov died, a vial was left beside him. The same type used years ago to poison Sergei Volkova. A rare mixture favoured by agents of the old Tsarist court. Tell me, Mademoiselle Nadia, where would such a poison be found today?" Her eyes widened in horror. No, I did not." Poirot raised his hand gently. "Calm yourself. I do not accuse. But I think someone wished it to appear that you had completed the vengeance your brother began." Lady Eleanor rose suddenly, her composure breaking. "You can't prove any of this," she whispered. "You can't." Poirot's gaze was steady. "I do not need to prove what will soon reveal itself. The phantom kills not from rage, but from fear, and the next death will not wait long." He moved toward the door, his small frame suddenly seeming to command the room. "We're not chasing a ghost, Inspector," he said quietly. "We're chasing a memory, and memories once awakened do not rest again." The sound of the sea drifted faintly through the open window, mingled with the sigh of the curtains. Somewhere in the depths of the hotel a door creaked open, slow, deliberate, like a stage curtain rising. Poirot turned his head, listening. "Ah," he murmured, "the past has found its voice." The corridor outside the lounge lay silent, save for the echo of Poirot's measured steps. He moved slowly, his gaze drifting over the patterned carpet as if reading a code woven into its threads. Inspector Arda followed, watching him with equal parts admiration and impatience. "You think one of them will strike again?" the inspector asked quietly. Poirot did not answer at once. He stopped near the stairwell where Petrov had fallen and knelt, examining the faint scuff marks along the stone. "You see, mon ami, our murderer is bold but not careless. Every act thus far has been neat, controlled. Yet perfection, perfection is a fragile thing. One must breathe upon it gently and it will crack." Arda frowned. "You mean to provoke them?" "Precisely." Poirot rose, dusting his cuffs. "When the truth hides behind polished manners, one must create imbalance. It is only when people stumble that they show us the shape of their real selves." By afternoon, the great lounge of the Pera Palace was transformed into a stage for Poirot's little drama. He had summoned every key figure, the widow, the sister, the concierge, and a few members of staff. The atmosphere was electric, charged with suspicion and fatigue. Lady Eleanor sat by the window, her veil drawn low. Nadia Volkova stood rigidly by the mantel, her eyes fixed on the floor. Kemal lingered near the door, feigning calm as he polished his spectacles for the third time. Poirot entered last, carrying a small wooden box. "Mesdames, Monsieur," he began pleasantly, "you have all been most cooperative. But alas, even cooperation can deceive. A good liar does not contradict himself, he contradicts the truth." He placed the box on the table and opened it. Inside lay a single object, a feather, carved of ivory and tipped with silver. "You all recognize this, of course," he said. "It was found near the body of Count Voronoff, a symbol perhaps of innocence, or of guilt disguised as grace." No one spoke. Poirot lifted the feather carefully and turned it in the light. "You see, I have had it examined. The silver tip bears traces of a substance most unusual, sodium chloride fused with a rare oil found in candle smoke. Such residue could only occur if the object had been briefly exposed to intense heat, such as the flame of a gas lamp. Now, who among you carries such a lamp?" Arda glanced about, puzzled. None responded. Poirot smiled faintly. "Curious, is it not? Yet I remember, when I first arrived, seeing a small lamp upon the concierge's desk. Its wick burned low, its shade marked by soot." Kemal's eyes flickered. "A hotel lamp, monsieur? Nothing more?" "Ah, yes," Poirot said softly. "But that lamp burned the night the Count died, did it not? And the feather was heated by it, perhaps to cleanse away something it carried. Blood, maybe." Kemal's composure faltered. "You cannot prove that." "Non, not yet. But there are other ways to prove what is hidden." Poirot set the feather back into the box and folded his hands neatly. "I have a small experiment in mind, a test, not of science, but of conscience. You will humour me, yes?" The silence that followed was uneasy. Poirot gestured for the curtains to be drawn. The room dimmed until only a single beam of light fell across the table. He took from his pocket a small vial filled with fine ash and scattered it gently across the table's surface. "Each of you," he said, "will write the Count's name in this dust. Alexei. Nothing more. A simple act, yet one that may reveal more than confession." Arda looked uncertain, but said nothing. One by one the suspects approached. Lady Eleanor went first, tracing the name with graceful control. Nadia followed, her letters small and trembling. Kemal hesitated before bending forward, his hand steady until the final stroke, when the glass edge of the table caught his reflection. For the briefest instant his fingers froze, then swept too quickly through the ash, smearing his writing beyond recognition. Poirot said nothing. He merely observed, then dusted the table lightly with a cloth. "Merci. You see, Inspector, writing leaves more than words. It leaves intention. The hand betrays what the heart conceals." Arda frowned. "You mean his writing?" "Non, non. Look closer." Poirot tilted the lamp toward the glass surface. In the reflection beneath the faint dust one could see smudges, 2 lines of ash drawn horizontally beside Kemal's name. Poirot smiled. the mark of hesitation. The guilty never write cleanly, their minds run faster than their hands. Kamal's face had grown pale. "This is absurd, monsieur. You would accuse me because of dust?" Poirot's tone remained calm. "Ah, but it is not only dust, it is memory. For when you wrote, you looked not at the letters but at yourself, in the glass. You feared what you might see." Kamal's composure fractured. "You twist everything," he spat. "I only wish to help." "Indeed," said Poirot. "And yet, when Petrov died, it was you who discovered the body first, was it not? Again, before the police." Kamal swallowed. "I heard a noise." "Or expected one," Poirot murmured. "You see, I have spoken with your night porter. He recalls a man descending to the servant level not long before Petrov's death. A man wearing your coat." Arda turned sharply. "Is this true?" Kamal's gaze darted between them. "There are dozens of similar coats. Anyone could have—" Poirot cut him off gently. "No, my friend. The coat is not what condemns you. It is your silence. You see, the moment I spoke of the feather and the lamp, you tensed. Not at the mention of murder, but at the mention of heat. You feared I would find what the lamp's flame erased." He opened the box once more and held the feather close to the light. Beneath the soot lies a faint trace of ink, blue, indelible. Ink from the Count's letter. You burned it to destroy the signature you forged. Kamal's hand trembled. "Forgery?" "Yes. You took the Count's unfinished letter and completed it yourself, adding the words that would draw me here, 'The phantom walks again.' A message meant to distract, to cloak an ordinary crime in mystery." Arda stepped forward. "Then Petrov. He didn't kill the Count." Poirot shook his head. "Non. The Count was poisoned. The knife and confession, both a ruse. Our concierge here merely ensured the story was tidy, the suspicion convenient and the truth buried." Kamal's breath came fast. "You have no proof." "Perhaps," Poirot said softly, "but you have just supplied it." He nodded toward the table, where Kamal's gloved hands pressed into the ash. In the lamplight, the faint blue stain of ink showed through the leather, identical to that on the feather. Kamal stared at his hands, the truth dawning too late. His lips parted, but no words came. Poirot exhaled, almost sadly. "You see, my friend, a man may erase his crimes from paper, but not from his own flesh." As the constables moved to take him away, the tension in the room broke like glass. Lady Eleanor's veil trembled as she looked toward Poirot, her voice barely a whisper. "Then it's over?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, madame. The man we've caught tonight forged the lie, but he did not invent it. The true phantom still walks, and somewhere in this city she watches to see if the lie has bought her enough time to disappear." He glanced toward the window where the sky was fading into dusk once more, the sea beyond painted in ashen silver. "The past," he murmured, "is not yet done with us." The following morning broke with a pale, uncertain light. A faint fog had rolled in from the Bosphorus, softening the sharp edges of the city and muting the hum of trams beyond the Pera Palace. Within the hotel, however, unease lingered like the smell of extinguished candles. Word of the concierge's arrest had spread swiftly, and though the guests whispered of resolution, Poirot felt only the weight of incompletion pressing behind his temples. He sat in the lounge, his immaculate breakfast untouched, his gaze fixed on the silver feather resting within its wooden box. It gleamed softly under the morning light, silent, unassuming, yet it held the final echo of a forgery and perhaps something deeper. He had planned to examine it again in full daylight, to confirm his suspicion that the ink on its edge matched the Count's private stationery. But before he could begin, Inspector Arda entered the room, his usually brisk step subdued. "Bad news, monsieur," he said grimly. "The evidence room was broken into last night." Poirot's eyes lifted slowly. "Broken into?" Arda nodded, his jaw tight. "The feather, the forged letter, even the locket. Gone. Every item connected to the Count's death." For a moment, Poirot said nothing. His fingers traced the rim of his teacup, the porcelain trembling faintly against the saucer. "And who stood guard?" "Two men," Arda replied. "Reliable ones. They swear they saw nothing, heard nothing. The door was locked when the morning shift arrived." Poirot rose, straightening his cuffs. "Mon Dieu, the thief does not fear walls or keys. He fears only time. Someone wishes to erase what we have learned before I can connect the final thread." They went at once to the small office near the back of the police station, where the evidence had been stored. The lock was unbroken, the hinges undisturbed. Inside, a faint scent lingered in the air, lavender and smoke. Poirot's sharp nose caught it immediately. "Do you smell it, Inspector? A perfume too delicate for this place. The scent of a lady who does not expect to be caught." Ada sniffed cautiously. "Faversham." "Oui, or perhaps Volkova," Poirot murmured. "Both wear the veil of elegance to conceal the storm beneath. But which storm broke last night?" He knelt, studying the floorboards. A faint trail of ash led from the table to the window, where the latch hung open by a fraction. He brushed a fingertip across it. Soot. The same kind he had seen in the fireplace of room 214. Our phantom enters as she always does, through fire and silence. Could she truly have done this herself? Ada asked. Poirot stood, gazing out the window at the misty courtyard below. Perhaps not alone. The act is too swift, too precise. She has help, or someone's protection. He turned sharply. "Tell me, Inspector, who had access to the evidence keys?" Ada hesitated. "Only myself, my deputy, and—" He stopped, eyes widening. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "You remember, yes? The deputy who arrived late last night, reeking of cheap tobacco and Turkish coffee. He brought the reports from the hotel, did he not?" Ada's face hardened. "He's been with me for years." Poirot's expression was sympathetic but unyielding. Loyal men can be loyal to the wrong cause. Back at the Pera Palace, the corridors had filled with hushed movement. Chambermaids polishing brass handles, guests checking out early, nervous to be so near infamy. Poirot moved through it all like a ghost, his mind turning. The clues were vanishing one by one, and now, without the feather or the locket, his deductions hung upon memory and instinct alone. He found Lady Eleanor in the reading room, dressed in grey silk. Her posture calm, but her fingers restless upon the pages of a newspaper she clearly wasn't reading. "Ah, madame," Poirot greeted gently. "I hope you slept well." "I rarely sleep well, monsieur," she replied without looking up. "Indeed," Poirot said softly. "Guilt makes a poor companion for slumber." Her eyes flicked to his, sharp beneath the veil. "Are you accusing me again?" "Accusing? Not merely observing. You see, someone entered the police evidence room last night, and I think that someone wished to protect more than themselves. The locket you held once so close is gone." Her composure faltered, only slightly, but Poirot saw the tremor ripple through her hands before she lowered them from the paper. "Gone?" she echoed faintly. "Then there is nothing left to prove anything at all. Except truth, madame. Truth leaves its fingerprints in the soul." She rose abruptly, setting the newspaper aside. "You think me capable of such things? I have lived long enough with ghosts, monsieur. I do not need to steal them back." She brushed past him, her perfume trailing like smoke, lavender and something faintly sweet. Poirot closed his eyes for an instant, the same scent from the evidence room. When he opened them, Nadia Volkova was watching from the far end of the lounge. She approached quietly, her expression drawn. "She did it, didn't she?" she whispered. "She destroyed what tied her to him." Poirot regarded her carefully. "Perhaps, or perhaps someone wishes us to believe she did." They walked together through the corridor. The silence between them waited with unfinished confession. "You told me once," Poirot said softly, "that your brother died here, that Count Voronov betrayed him, and yet you said nothing when you learned the same poison killed Petrov." Nadia's face turned pale. "You think I think," Poirot interrupted, "that you knew before anyone else what kind of poison it was. You recognized it not from sight, but from memory. A memory you would rather have buried." She stopped, clutching the wall for balance. "You don't understand. Sergei was innocent. When the British came for him, I begged Alexei to help. He refused. He said my brother's death would serve a greater purpose. And it did. It bought his safety. I swore I would not let the same fate come for me." Poirot's voice softened. "Then you know what was in those documents he sold. The same that Lady Eleanor's husband tried to suppress." Nadia nodded weakly. "They would have exposed half the consulate as traitors. Eleanor's husband was one of them. She protected him then, just as she protects herself now." Poirot turned to face her fully. "Then the theft serves you both. The evidence gone, the case muddled. Two women, bound by the same man's deceit, each with reason to hide the past. Before she could answer, the sound of raised voices came from the lobby. Poirot and Ada hurried toward it to find two constables arguing with the clerk. On the counter lay an opened envelope addressed to Hercule Poirot. Its contents were simple: a single white feather, newly polished, gleaming clean of ink or soot. Beneath it, a note written in elegant French. "You look too long at shadows, monsieur. Some ghosts are kinder left unseen." Ada swore softly. Mockery. Poirot lifted the feather carefully, examining its pristine surface. "No, my friend. A message. Someone wishes to tell us they are not finished." He turned toward the windows, the light of afternoon filtering through pale fog, his expression unreadable. "We chase a phantom, yes," he murmured, "but this one knows I am close. When evidence vanishes, it is not to end a story, it is to rewrite it. And our murderer is not content to escape. She wishes to control how history remembers her." He slipped the feather into his pocket, the faint scent of lavender clinging to his fingers. "The game resumes, Inspector," he said quietly. "And this time, we play against a hand that knows exactly where to strike." The night returned to Constantinople heavy with tension, the fog thickening along the waterfront like a living thing. Poirot stood at the window of his hotel room, the newly delivered feather lying on the table behind him, its pale gleam mocking him in the lamplight. The city below seemed hushed, waiting. Somewhere, the murderer moved unseen, confident, deliberate, and still one step ahead. Inspector Ada had tripled the watch around the Pera Palace. No one entered or left without his men noting it. Yet Poirot, staring out into the mist, knew such measures meant little against a mind that understood illusion. "Our adversary," he murmured, "is not one who runs. She dances, and she has just changed the rhythm." A knock at the door broke his reverie. It was a constable, pale and breathless. "Monsieur Poirot, the inspector asks you to come at once. There has been another incident." Poirot followed him swiftly through the corridor, his polished shoes silent against the carpet. The air inside the hotel had changed, tighter, anxious. Guests peered from half-open doors, whispering. The constable led him down to the garden terrace, where lamplight flickered unevenly through the mist. Ada stood near the fountain, his coat collar turned up, his face grim. At his feet lay the still body of Nadia Volkova. Her dark hair spilled over the marble edge, her eyes half open, fixed upon the sky. Around her throat, faint bruises bloomed like shadowed fingerprints. The sound of running water filled the silence. Poirot knelt beside her, touching the edge of her sleeve gently. "Ah, mademoiselle," he whispered, "you feared death once, and yet she came to you as softly as a whisper." Ada's voice was low, tight. "The night porter found her 10 minutes ago. No one saw anyone enter or leave the terrace." "Then she was lured," Poirot said quietly. "Someone she trusted." "She left her room around 10, Ada continued. "The maid saw her descend the main staircase. She said Mademoiselle Volkova looked frightened, as if she were being followed." Poirot's gaze drifted toward the fountain. The mist coiled above it like smoke, and at the base, half hidden by fallen petals, something gleamed. He reached for it, a small gold pin, shaped like a falcon's wing, its tip bent and darkened. He turned it over in his hand, and the faint scent of a lavender rose once more. Ada swore softly. The same perfume, the same woman. "Or someone who wishes us to believe so," Poirot said. "We tread now upon the stage of deception, my friend. The murderer writes her play in our presence, and we, the audience, applaud without knowing it." They carried the body inside, laying it in one of the smaller drawing rooms, which Poirot insisted be locked at once. "No one but you and I shall enter," he told Ada. "The killer will return for what she has left behind. They always do." Later that night, Poirot sat alone in the salon, the feather, the falcon pin, and his note spread before him, like a constellation of meaning he could almost, but not quite, name. The sound of rain began to patter against the glass, faint but insistent. The clock struck midnight. He heard footsteps, light, deliberate. He turned his head slightly but did not move. A figure emerged from the shadows, Lady Eleanor Faversham, draped in her mourning veil, her face half concealed. "Madam," Poirot said softly, "you shouldn't wander the corridors at such an hour." She stopped near the fire, her voice trembling but steady. "I had to see you. I heard about the girl. Is it true?" "It is," Poirot replied. "Mademoiselle Volkova is dead." She shuddered visibly, clutching at the mantel for support. "Then, it's over, isn't it? She was the last. She hated him. Hated me. Perhaps she—" Poirot rose. "No, madame. She did not kill the Count. She was silenced. There is a difference." Lady Eleanor's breath quickened. "Silenced? By whom?" Poirot studied her. "That is what I hope you will tell me." She turned sharply, eyes flashing beneath her veil. "You think I— Good God, monsieur, how dare you?" He moved closer, his voice low and measured. "The scent of lavender at every scene. The forged letter in your husband's hand. The documents that tied the Count's fortune to your late husband's scandal. You have lost too much, madame, and gained too little. Such imbalance breeds desperation." Her lips parted, but no words came. Her gloved hands trembled. Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew the falcon pin. "Recognize it? It was found beside the second victim. You wore its twin upon your gown the night we dined. A matching pair, yes?" Her eyes widened, her composure cracking like glass. "You found that?" "Oui," Poirot said softly. "And so will others soon, unless you explain." She sank into the chair, her shoulders trembling. For a moment she looked small, fragile, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "It was mine, yes, but I didn't kill her. I swear it. I went to speak with her earlier, to beg her to leave the city. She was going to expose me. She knew about the letters. But when I arrived, she wasn't there. I returned to my room, that is all." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then why was your perfume upon her body?" "Because she took my shawl." Eleanor's voice rose, desperate now. "She said it was too cold, that she would bring it back. I never saw her again." For a long moment, Poirot said nothing. Then he turned toward the window, his mind flickering through details. The broken lamp, the stolen evidence, the reappearance of the feather. "She borrowed your shawl," he repeated softly, "and with it, your scent." He spun suddenly, his tone sharp. "Inspector?" Ada burst through the door almost immediately. "What is it?" Poirot's face was pale, his expression fierce. "The murderer did not strike at the girl. She mistook her for another. The intended victim was Lady Eleanor." Ada stiffened. "Then she'll try again." "Non, mon ami," Poirot said. "She already has. The second murder is merely the shadow of the first, a rehearsal for what is yet to come." He turned back to Lady Eleanor. "You must remain under guard. The killer has failed once. She will not fail twice." The widow stared at him, her face drained of colour. "You think she's still here?" Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "Here, in this hotel, hiding in plain sight." Suddenly a crash echoed from the corridor, a shout, the sound of running feet. Poirot and Ada rushed to the door. A constable stumbled into view, blood on his forehead. "The drawing room," he gasped. "The body, it's gone!" For a heartbeat, no one moved. Poirot's eyes widened, a chill passing through him. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "The dead do not walk, Inspector, but ghosts can be carried." They ran through the corridor, down the grand staircase, toward the locked room. The door was ajar, its lock splintered cleanly. Inside, the couch where Nadia Volkova's body had rested was empty, the sheet rumpled, the faint trace of her perfume still lingering in the air. Poirot stood still, every detail registering. The faint drag marks across the carpet, the candle still burning low, the open window that faced the dark courtyard. Rain drifted inward, speckling the floor. "She has been taken," he said softly. "Removed. Perhaps to conceal something, or to send a message." Ada turned to him, shaken. "What message?" Poirot's gaze lifted toward the courtyard beyond the window. "That the game is not yet finished, and that she, whoever she is, has no intention of letting me reach the final act before she writes it herself." Lightning flashed over the Bosphorus, illuminating the mist below. Poirot's reflection wavered in the glass, small, neat, precise. And somewhere in that reflection, behind him, the faintest shadow moved. He turned sharply, but the corridor behind was empty. Still he smiled faintly to himself. "Ah," he whispered, "so you watch me too, madame. Then let us see which of us tires first." The courtyard was empty when they arrived, save for the cold wind that rustled through the cypress trees. The rain had stopped, leaving the stones slick and shining like mirrors. Poirot stood by the open window where the body had been taken, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed upon the ground as though listening to something beneath the earth itself. Inspector Arder barked orders to his men, their boots echoing off the marble walls, but Poirot barely moved. His gaze lingered on the faint drag marks leading from the window to the side gate, where the iron latch hung crooked. "She was carried out this way," Arder said, stooping beside him. "But why take a corpse into the street? To hide it?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Non, mon ami. Not to hide, to mislead. Each move she makes draws us toward confusion, away from pattern, and yet, patterns are like rivers. They always return to their source." He took a step closer to the gate and knelt. A scrap of fabric no larger than a postage stamp clung to the latch. Poirot lifted it gently. It was silk, black, and faintly perfumed. He held it to his nose, his brows rising. Not lavender this time. Something heavier. Myrrh. Arder frowned. Then it wasn't Lady Faversham's perfume. "No," Poirot said softly, "and therein lies the charm of our phantom. She borrows other people's ghosts. First lavender, now myrrh, always one step ahead, one disguise deeper." They followed the trail as far as the street, where it vanished into the mist. The lamps threw golden halos across the wet cobblestones. Poirot paused beneath one of them, his eyes narrowing. "You see this, Inspector? The footprints. 3 sets, 2 men, 1 woman. The men carry weight, their steps are deep. The woman walks lightly, but her stride is deliberate. She was not dragged, she walked among them." Arder's eyes widened. "You think she was alive when they took her?" "I think," Poirot said quietly, "that the dead woman was not the woman we believe." They returned to the hotel as dawn began to creep over the Bosphorus. The light through the windows was thin and grey. The air smelled of damp stone and burnt oil. Poirot requested coffee, and while Arder arranged the men, he paced slowly across the lounge, his eyes flicking from chair to curtain to fireplace. Every detail seemed familiar, yet something pulsed beneath the surface, a faint rhythm that refused to be ignored. It was then that his gaze fell upon the clock on the mantel. It ticked steadily, but the time was wrong. 1 hour slow. Poirot frowned. "Curious," he murmured. "This clock has been wound recently, but why adjust the time?" Arder looked up. "Perhaps the staff—" "Non. The staff would not touch the mantel of a guest suite. Only someone who needed to mark a moment precisely. Someone who wished to fix the hour of death, or disguise it." Poirot bent closer, inspecting the clock's glass face. A small fingerprint smudged its edge. He reached for his handkerchief and dabbed it delicately. Beneath the smudge lay a faint trace of ash, not from a cigarette, but from burnt paper. "Inspector," he said quietly, "fetch me the remnants from the fireplace in room 214. When the ashes were brought, Poirot sifted them carefully. Among the blackened curls of paper lay a half-melted piece of wax, the remnant of a seal. He lifted it with tweezers, turning it under the light. The imprint was faint but legible, a falcon in flight. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "At last," he whispered. "She returns to her signature," Arder leaned in. "The same symbol from the pin?" "Exactement. And the same motif that adorned the crest upon the letterhead of the Russian consulate 6 years ago." Poirot smiled faintly. "Do you recall, Inspector, what I told you about patterns? The dead man, the missing letters, the forged confession. They are all part of one design, crafted long before Count Voronov set foot again in Constantinople. This began not with love or money, but with betrayal, a betrayal of nations." Arder frowned. "You mean the consulate scandal? Oui, the documents that Voronov used to blackmail both the English widow and the Russian exile were copies. Forged, yes, but from originals smuggled through the very room where Sergei Volkova died. That room has seen this play before, and now our phantom has staged its encore." He turned toward the window. "But who profits from these ghosts returning? Not Lady Faversham. She is a pawn. Not Nadia. She is dead, or so it seems. No, the hand behind the curtain belongs to one who profits from both silence and chaos." Arder's eyes widened. "Kemal?" Poirot smiled sadly. "Non, mon ami. Kemal was clever, but he was a man of small ambitions. The one who moves now thinks like a spider, patient, invisible, and perfectly still until the web trembles. He picked up the falcon pin again, holding it beside the melted seal. 2 symbols, one meaning. Both belong to the same network, remnants of the old Russian order, still whispering in the dark. Someone here in Constantinople continues their work. Just then the door opened, and a messenger entered, bowing. A note for Monsieur Poirot. Poirot accepted it, breaking the seal carefully. Inside was a single line written in elegant script. At dawn, the city forgets its dead. Perhaps you should too. Arda cursed under his breath. She taunts you again. Non, Inspector, she reminds me. Poirot's gaze hardened. This is no random cruelty. She strikes according to ritual. Always in the same hours, always surrounded by mirrors, by fire, by the scent of the dead. Lavender, myrrh, ash, symbols of purification. It is not vengeance she seeks. It is absolution. He turned sharply toward the fireplace. Do you recall how each scene was marked? The Count's room smelled of lavender, the concierge's desk, candle soot, the evidence room, burned wax, and now, the girl by the fountain, myrrh. Arda stared. You mean she leaves the scent deliberately? Yes. It is her confession. She believes she cleanses each act, erasing her sins as she repeats them. She is not destroying evidence, and she's performing a ritual, and in ritual there is always order. He crossed to the desk and began rearranging his notes. Times, locations, victims, each marked by scent and flame. As he laid them in sequence, a pattern emerged, a spiral curling inward, each event leading closer to the same point. Room 214. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. Every circle returns to its beginning. She will come back. It is inevitable. Arda looked unsettled. You mean she'll return to the scene of the first crime? Not to the scene, Inspector, Poirot said. Softly. To the memory. To where it all began. He closed his eyes, thinking. Lady Faversham's husband, the attaché. Sergei Volkova, the spy. Count Voronoff, the broker. 3 men bound by one woman's betrayal. A messenger, a scapegoat, and a lover. All destroyed by the same hand. But which woman? The question hung in the air like smoke. Then Poirot's eyes opened, sharp as glass. The clue was there from the beginning, mon ami. The feather, not of a bird, but carved from ivory. Do you recall where such carvings were made? The Odessa workshops, the same city where both the widow and the count once lived, but the design, the falcon, was unique to a particular artisan, one who disappeared after the revolution. Her name was Lydia Volkova. Arda blinked. Volkova? Nadia's mother? Poirot nodded slowly. Alive, perhaps, or at least living through her daughter's vengeance. The pattern was never the daughter's alone. It was inherited. He turned toward the window, where dawn's first light bled across the horizon. The true phantom, Inspector, is not the woman we see, but the mother who taught her to kill in the name of memory. The ghost that walks in flesh. The fog began to lift outside, revealing the dark water of the Bosphorus. Poirot watched it in silence, his reflection flickering faintly in the glass beside his own. And for the first time he thought he saw another face there, distant and pale, watching him from the mist. He smiled faintly, almost to himself. Ah, he whispered, so the pattern completes itself. She has been with us all along. The mist had thinned by noon, revealing the pale sweep of the Bosphorus beneath a clouded sky. The city seemed to have drawn its breath in, holding it, waiting for the next turn of fate. Inside the Pera Palace, the atmosphere had grown thick with dread and rumour. Guests whispered in doorways and servants hurried with their eyes fixed to the ground. But Poirot walked as if through a dream, calm and deliberate, his every step weighted with the gravity of understanding that was beginning, finally, to take shape. He entered the quiet of the lounge where Inspector Arda waited, his features drawn tight with sleeplessness. On the table between them lay the recovered evidence, the falcon seal, the ivory feather, and the pin from the terrace. The constables had found the missing body at last, Nadia Volkova's lifeless form discovered near the old wharf, half shrouded by tarpaulin and rain. Yet Poirot's face showed no surprise when he heard it. So she is truly gone, he murmured softly, and with her, the final mask is removed. Arda leaned forward. You've seen the pattern, haven't you? You know who did this. Poirot's gaze wandered toward the window. Yes, my friend, but to name a name is not enough. One must first understand why. He turned, his voice low and steady. Tell me, Inspector, what do you see in these crimes? A theft gone wrong, a feud between two women, or a shadow of politics long buried? Ada hesitated. All of it, perhaps, but nothing explains the precision. The way every death, every act, feels almost deliberate. Deliberate, Poirot echoed. Oui, you touch the truth without realizing it. Each killing has been an offering, not to greed, not to vengeance, but to memory. Ada frowned. Memory. Poirot began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. Consider, mon ami, the details we have dismissed as decoration. The scent of lavender, the trace of myrrh, the use of fire, the ivory feather. Symbols, not accidents. Rituals of cleansing, of preservation. Whoever orchestrated this tragedy did not seek to destroy the past, but to preserve it, frozen, purified, beyond guilt or decay. He stopped before the table and picked up the feather. You remember the falcon motif, yes? The crest of the old Russian consulate, but also the emblem used by an underground circle during the revolution, an order that swore to protect what remained of the imperial secrets, the archives, and the names of those who had betrayed the Tsar. Those secrets passed through Constantinople once, hidden in jewels, in letters, in people. Ada's eyes widened. The Count. Oui, Count Voronov was one of them, a courier turned opportunist. He sold those names to the highest bidder, trading loyalty for gold. Sergei Volkova, Nadia's brother, was accused of treason because of him. And who exposed Sergei? Who handed the forged evidence to the British? Lady Eleanor's husband, the attaché. 2 betrayals, bound by one man's greed. But you see, Inspector, the past does not forgive. It waits. Ada stared at him. Then the daughter sought revenge for her brother, and for her mother? Ah, said Poirot quietly, but that is the tragedy. The daughter avenged a ghost that was still alive. He set the feather down and looked directly at Ada. Lydia Volkova, the mother, did not die in exile as the records claimed. She lived, hidden here in Constantinople under another name. For years she worked quietly within the very walls of this hotel, collecting secrets, arranging her revenge one thread at a time. When her daughter arrived seeking truth, she found only the mother's design, and became its instrument. Ada whispered, Lydia. Here? But who? Poirot's eyes flicked toward the grand staircase, where sunlight now filtered through the stained glass. Think, mon ami. Who moves unseen through these halls? Who knows every lock, every whisper, every guest's habit? The woman who has been in every scene yet never questioned. The housekeeper, Madame Vassiliev. Ada stiffened. The housekeeper. But she's been with the hotel for years. Everyone trusts her. Exactly, Poirot said softly. The perfect disguise. She cleans the traces others leave behind. The smell of lavender, the myrrh, the ashes. She calls them scents of refinement, but they are the markers of her ritual. She has carried her family's shame for 2 decades, shaping her grief into devotion. Each death she orchestrated was not for profit, but to restore her family's honour, to rewrite the story of betrayal that destroyed them. Ada sank into a chair, his voice low. But why kill Nadia? Her own daughter. Poirot's expression darkened. Because the daughter tried to end it. Nadia wanted to reveal the truth, to expose both the widow's guilt and her mother's hand in the deaths of Voronov and the others. She believed justice was enough, but for Madame Vassiliev, justice was not the goal. Redemption was. She saw her daughter's mercy as the final betrayal. Ada looked sickened. She killed her own blood to protect a lie. Poirot's tone softened. Not a lie, Inspector, a story she could live with. The mother believed that by silencing her daughter, she could sanctify the past, cleanse it of imperfection. To her, death was not cruelty. It was absolution. The clock in the corner struck 1. The chime was slow, hollow, echoing through the high ceilings. Poirot looked toward it thoughtfully. You recall the clock I found altered? It was set 1 hour behind, not to confuse us, but to mark the hour of her husband's death. The same hour her son died 6 years later. Every act she committed thereafter was bound to that moment, repeated in reverence, in guilt. Ada rubbed his temples. You think she'll come back here again? Poirot nodded slowly. She will. The pattern is complete but unfinished. The ritual demands one last cleansing, the death of the witness who uncovered it. And that, Inspector, will not be me. Ada stood. Lady Faversham? Yes. The widow who shared in the original sin. The one who still breathes the same air as her enemies. Madame Vassiliev will seek her tonight. The two men exchanged a look of grim understanding. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the sea, and a gust of wind rattled the glass panes. Poirot's reflection wavered beside Ada's. Two men poised on the edge of a revelation that felt less like triumph and more like grief. Poirot's voice, when he spoke again, was quieter, almost mournful. So you see, my friend, the motive was never hatred alone. It was devotion twisted into obsession, love that refused to die. Madame Vassiliev killed not for revenge, but for the memory of what her world once was, a world of loyalty, of faith, of order. To her, every murder was a prayer whispered into the void, begging history to forgive her. He reached for the feather one last time, its pale surface gleaming in the dull light. It is a strange thing, Inspector, to kill for purity, but such purity destroys all that it touches, and in the end it leaves nothing but ghosts. Ada glanced toward the darkened staircase. Then tonight, we wait for the ghost to return. Poirot nodded, his eyes distant, already seeing the path ahead. Oui, mon ami. And when she does, she will not find absolution, only truth. The storm rolled in just as night fell, sweeping over the Bosphorus like a black veil. The wind rattled the windows of the Pera Palace, carrying with it the promise of reckoning. Rain lashed against the glass in sudden, violent bursts. In the grand corridor outside the drawing-room, Poirot stood perfectly still, his silhouette framed against the soft glow of a single lamp. The hotel was quiet, too quiet, save for the slow ticking of the clock that marked each passing second with deliberate precision. Inspector Ada's voice came low behind him. The staff are in their quarters. The exits are guarded. If she means to strike tonight, she'll find no escape. Poirot did not turn. No, my friend, she will not run. A woman like Madame Vassiliev has lived too long among ghosts. She does not flee them, she summons them. He glanced toward the far end of the corridor where room 214 waited in silence. The door was ajar, just enough for a sliver of light to escape. Within that room, the trap was set. A candle burned low upon the desk, its flame flickering, throwing shadows across the faded wallpaper. The scent of lavender and myrrh, familiar, haunting, drifted faintly through the air. Lady Eleanor Faversham sat within, pale and rigid, her eyes fixed on the window. Poirot had explained the plan in precise detail. She was to remain seated, the window unlatched, the light dim, as though she had dozed off waiting for sleep. The killer would come for her, as he knew she must. Ada and his men would wait in silence in the corridor, hidden behind the far doors, ready to move the instant Poirot gave the signal. Yet for all the arrangements, Poirot felt a curious stillness within him, a quiet melancholy, as though he pitied the very person he meant to expose. He had seen many killers unmasked in his time, but this one had not killed out of greed or cruelty. She had killed because her heart refused to accept the passage of time. A sudden gust of wind blew down the corridor, extinguishing one of the lamps. The flame sputtered, then died. Ada stiffened. The window, perhaps. Poirot raised a hand for silence. The faintest sound drifted toward them from the far end, a slow, uneven step. The soft whisper of skirts brushing against marble. Then another step, deliberate, closer. Poirot's eyes glimmered in the half-darkness. She comes, he murmured. The footsteps drew nearer, stopping outside room 214. The door creaked softly as it opened wider, the light spilling faintly into the hall. Poirot could just make out the silhouette of a woman, a small figure, stooped, dressed in black. Her movements were careful, reverent, almost ritualistic. She paused at the threshold, her head bowed, then stepped inside. Poirot moved silently, inching closer to the doorway. Through the narrow opening, he could see her more clearly now, Madame Vassiliev, her face half hidden beneath her mourning veil, her hands gloved and trembling slightly as they hovered near the candle flame. Her voice, when she spoke, was little more than a whisper. "Eleanor," she said, almost tenderly, "you sit here as if nothing has changed. Still the English rose, untouched by the filth that destroyed us all, How do you sleep knowing what your husband did?" Lady Faversham's voice wavered, though she kept to her role. "Lydia, you don't have to do this. It's over. The past." "The past?" Madame Vassiliev laughed softly, a sound too fragile to be human. "The past never ends, madame. It merely waits until we remember it." Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "And you have remembered too well, Madame Vassiliev." The woman froze. Her shoulders stiffened, her hand lowering slowly from the candle. She did not turn at once. "Monsieur Poirot," she said after a moment, her voice calm, almost serene. "I thought you would come." "Of course," Poirot replied. "For you this is not murder, it is ceremony. You must have your witness." She turned then, her eyes gleaming beneath the veil. "Witness?" she echoed softly. "No, monsieur, not witness. Confessor." Poirot inclined his head. "Then confess. For what purpose did you take so many lives? To erase guilt, or to preserve it?" Her gaze drifted toward the candle, the flame reflecting in her eyes like a living thing. "You do not understand. None of you could. They took everything from me. My husband, my son, my name. They called us traitors. I begged for mercy, but mercy was not in them, so I built my sanctuary here. Every corridor, every room became my chapel of remembrance. The feather, the fire, the scent, they were prayers. Each life I took purified what remained." "And your daughter?" Poirot asked gently. "Was she also a prayer?" Something flickered across her face then, a flash of pain, raw and unguarded. "She betrayed me," Madame Vassiliev whispered. "She wanted to speak to the police, to expose everything. She did not understand. She thought truth could heal us. But truth is a knife, monsieur. It cuts without pity. So I did what I had to do. I freed her from her doubt." Poirot's eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. "You freed her from life." Madame Vassiliev's breath trembled. It was mercy. She was too kind for this world, too fragile to see what must be done. Lady Faversham rose suddenly, tears glistening in her eyes. "And what of me, Lydia? What is this then? Justice? Punishment? You would kill me for my husband's sins?" The older woman regarded her with terrible calm. "Not for his sins, for yours. You survived him. You wore his name while he buried mine." She reached into her coat and drew out a small vial, the glass glinting faintly in the candlelight. "The same. Poison your husband used on Sergei. You will taste what he gave." Poirot took one step forward, his voice low but commanding. "Enough, madame." Her eyes flicked toward him, and for the first time her composure faltered. "You cannot stop what has already been written," she said, her voice shaking now. "This ends as it began." Poirot's tone softened, almost sorrowful. "No, you're wrong. The past ends only when the living choose to let go." He stepped closer, his voice steady, almost hypnotic. "You have built your sanctuary upon ashes, but ashes cannot speak. You kill for memory, but memory cannot forgive." Madame Vassiliev's grip on the vial trembled. "You don't understand. I gave everything to this. If I stop, then what was it all for?" Poirot took another step, closing the distance. His eyes met hers, calm, unwavering. "For love, perhaps. But love twisted into suffering is not devotion. It is despair." For a moment she stood motionless, her hand trembling over the candle. Then, with a cry that was neither rage nor grief, she flung the vial toward the fire. It shattered, releasing a sharp, acrid scent that filled the air. Flames leapt high, consuming the curtains. Arda burst through the door with his men, shouting, but Poirot remained where he was, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the woman who had begun to weep beside the rising smoke. She sank to her knees, her veil falling back, revealing a face lined with years of sorrow. "It was supposed to end differently," she whispered. "I wanted peace. I only ever wanted peace." Poirot knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "And now, madame, you may have it. But not as you imagined. The dead do not ask for vengeance. They ask to be remembered." Madame Vassiliev bowed her head, her tears mingling with the scent of smoke and lavender. "Then remember me kindly, monsieur." Poirot's eyes softened. "I will remember you truthfully. It is kinder than kindness." As Arda's men led her away, the storm outside broke into thunder, shaking the very glass of the windows. Poirot turned once more to the dying fire, watching the last of the flames curl around the broken vial until nothing remained but embers and a faint wisp of grey smoke, the final ghost at last released. The storm passed with dawn, leaving the air sharp and brittle. The sky washed clean of its fury. The Palace had fallen into uneasy calm, the kind that comes after chaos but before true peace. Guests whispered about the night's events, the fire in room 214, the arrest of the housekeeper, the tragedy of vengeance mistaken for justice. By midday, the corridors had resumed their routine rhythm. The clinking of porcelain, the rustle of linen, the subdued hum of a city pretending that the ghosts had been laid to rest. But Hercule Poirot did not believe in peace that came too easily. He sat in the lounge, immaculate as ever, his grey suit unwrinkled despite the sleepless night. His coffee had gone cold before him, untouched. Outside, the Bosphorus shimmered beneath a pale light, deceptive in its tranquillity. Inspector Arda entered with a weary smile. "It's done, monsieur. Madame Vassiliev will face trial. She confessed to everything. The murders, the forgeries, even the plot to poison Lady Faversham. The papers will have their story by tomorrow. A closed case, at last." Poirot's eyes, however, did not lift from the window. "Ah, my friend, how often do we close a case only to discover the door was never locked at all?" Arda frowned, half amused, half exasperated. "You doubt her confession? You heard her yourself." "Oui, I heard. Every word, and therein lies the difficulty." Poirot finally turned, his voice soft but sharp. It was too perfect, too rehearsed. A woman who claims to kill for memory does not describe her acts as poetry. She describes them as necessity. "No, mon ami, there is something missing, something vital." Arda sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're looking for ghosts again, Poirot." Poirot's lips twitched faintly. "Perhaps, but ghosts often leave footprints, and ours, I think, are still warm." At that moment the hotel clerk hurried in, flustered. "Monsieur Poirot, a telegram just arrived for you. It was left at the front desk this morning. We assumed it was old. It bears last night's date." Poirot accepted it calmly, his expression unreadable as he broke the seal. The message was brief. "The one you seek still walks free. Look to the ashes." He stared at it for a long time, then rose abruptly. "Inspector, come. It appears Madame Vassiliev has written her final lie." They went together to the small police storeroom where the recovered evidence had been placed, the remains from the burned room carefully catalogued in boxes. Poirot sifted through them in silence, his gloved hands deliberate. He paused over a charred scrap of fabric, then over the melted remnants of a candle holder. Finally his eyes caught something at the bottom of the last crate, a small object blackened by fire yet still faintly gleaming. He held it to the light. It was a locket, but not the one they had already seen. Inside, beneath soot and grime, lay a miniature portrait not of Nadia Volkova, but of Madame Vassiliev herself, younger, her hair unbound, her eyes alive with fire. Opposite her image was another, Count Alexei Voronov. Poirot's expression darkened. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "this changes everything." Arda leaned in. They were lovers. Not lovers, Inspector, something far more dangerous, accomplices. Poirot closed the locket gently. She was not punishing him for betrayal. She was protecting him, even in death. Arda blinked. "But she killed him." Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, I believed it. Yes, we all did. But the poison, the locked room, the forgery, they were all designed to suggest her guilt, not his. Someone wanted to erase them both, to close the circle." He began pacing. "Think carefully. Who first discovered the body? The concierge, Kamal. He sent the telegram, tampered with the scene, created the illusion of mystery. Yet we now know he served her cause, until he turned against her, stealing the jewels, forging the letter. That betrayal she could not forgive. But what if there was another who profited by both their deaths?" Arda frowned. "Who else could it be? The widow?" Poirot paused. "Lady Faversham. Yes, she had motive, opportunity, but not the temperament for deception on this scale. No, this was orchestrated by someone who lived in the shadows long before any of us arrived. Someone whose silence has been too convenient." He turned sharply. "The deputy, Arda, the one who guarded the evidence room the night it was emptied. You said he had been with you for years, oui? Ada stiffened. Yes, but... you trust him, naturally. That is his gift. But what if his loyalty was to another? The Russian network, perhaps, that still moves beneath this city's polite facades. The Order of the Falcon did not die with the revolution, my friend. It simply learned to hide. Before Ada could reply, a commotion sounded from the corridor, raised voices, the scrape of boots. A constable burst through the door. Inspector! The prisoner! She's dead! Ada paled. Dead? How? She drank something. We think poison. It must have been hidden in her sleeve. Poirot's eyes closed briefly. Then she has been silenced. Again. They went at once to the holding cell. Madame Vassiliev lay slumped against the wall, her face peaceful, almost serene. A faint smile rested on her lips. Poirot knelt beside her, his expression unreadable. On the floor beside her hand lay a folded scrap of paper, burned at the edges. He lifted it delicately. Scrawled in her careful hand were 5 words. Forgive me. He's still here. Poirot rose slowly. She knew she was being watched. Her confession, her arrest, all part of a greater play. She was never the spider, Inspector. She was the last fly caught in the web. Ada's face hardened. Then who? Poirot's gaze moved to the window, where the pale morning light slanted across the cell bars. The one who taught her how to weave it. That afternoon, Poirot requested a final meeting in the lounge. Lady Eleanor Faversham arrived escorted by 2 constables, her face drawn but defiant. Another interrogation, monsieur? Or have you come to deliver my husband's ghost at last? Poirot gestured for her to sit. Non, madame, I come only to ask one question. How long have you been part of the order? Her eyes flickered, the smallest betrayal. Then she smiled faintly. You really do see everything, don't you? Not everything, Poirot replied. Only what people try hardest to hide. You played your role beautifully. The grieving, widow, the victim, the voice of innocence. Even Madame Vassiliev believed you her equal in sorrow, but you, madame, were her superior in craft. She said nothing, only watched him with that cold, faint smile. You found Voronov again, Poirot continued softly. He had the documents your husband once forged, the names that could still destroy empires. You and Madame Vassiliev agreed to protect them. But greed, ambition, revenge, they crept back into your hearts. When she hesitated, you acted. You poisoned the Count, framed her daughter, silenced the witnesses, then turned the trap upon her. Lady Eleanor's smile faded. You have no proof. Poirot's eyes glinted. Perhaps not in your hand, madame, but upon your wrist. She glanced down instinctively. Around her gloved wrist, faint against the skin, was the imprint of a small burn, a mark shaped like a falcon's wing. Poirot's voice was soft. The brand of the order, the sign of its last high priestess. Ada stepped forward. Lady Faversham, you're under arrest. But she moved faster. From her sleeve, a glint of silver flashed. A dagger, slender and ornate, the same design that had pierced the Count's heart. Poirot did not flinch as she raised it, his gaze unwavering. Madame, he said gently, even now, you serve the dead. For a heartbeat she froze. Then the knife slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering to the marble floor. Her strength broke. She sank into the chair, her voice trembling through tears. It wasn't supposed to end like this. We wanted to protect what was left. The truth, the names, the honour of a dying world. Poirot's expression softened, his voice quiet. And in doing so, madame, you killed everything that could have lived beyond it. As the constables led her away, the rain began again, light and steady against the windows. Not the furious storm of the night before, but something gentler, cleansing. Poirot stood alone by the fire, his reflection wavering in the glass. Ada joined him, weary but grateful. It's truly over now, Poirot smiled faintly. Over? Perhaps. But tell me, my friend, can one ever close the door on the past when it holds the key to our souls? He turned toward the flickering fire, his voice low, almost to himself. In Constantinople, even the ashes remember. The trial of Lady Eleanor Faversham never reached its expected conclusion. 3 days after her arrest, as the city's newspapers prepared their grand headlines, she was found dead in her cell. A vial of poison clutched delicately in her hand, the faintest trace of a smile upon her lips. The guards swore she had been searched. No one could explain how the poison had entered her possession. Some said it had been hidden in the hem of her gown. Others whispered of secret allies who still moved unseen in the city. Whatever the truth, Constantinople awoke once more to murmurs of ghosts, of secrets, buried and reborn. When Poirot received the news, he did not speak for several minutes. He stood at the window of his suite, the morning light spilling across his reflection, his face composed but distant. Inspector Arda, standing behind him, shifted uneasily. "So it ends like this," he said quietly. "2 women dead, the order destroyed. Justice served, I suppose." Poirot's voice came soft, almost detached. "Served, perhaps, but not understood." Arda frowned. "You doubt her guilt?" Poirot turned, his gaze sharp and sorrowful. "Non, mon ami, I do not doubt her guilt. I doubt her freedom. You see, when a woman like Lady Faversham dies by her own hand, she does not escape justice. She completes it." He walked toward the table where the last of the evidence lay neatly arranged. The falcon seal, the ivory feather, the charred locket. His fingers hovered above them without touching. "Each object tells a story, Inspector, if one only listens. And these? They have been speaking for weeks." Arda folded his arms. "Then speak for them, Poirot. Tell me what we all missed." Poirot nodded slowly. "Very well. Let us walk once more through the dance of deception." He lifted the feather first, holding it delicately between 2 fingers. This little trinket, the beginning and the end. At first glance, an ornament, nothing more. But its surface was carved from ivory native not to Russia, as I assumed, but to the colonies of Africa, the very source from which the British obtained their finest trade materials. And who, Inspector, had access to the shipments arriving through the consulate warehouses? Arda's brow furrowed. The attaché, Lady Faversham's husband. Just so. He smuggled the documents, the forged seals, through those same shipments. He hid treason within commerce. Lady Faversham, in turn, hid guilt within elegance. Poirot set the feather down gently. But the key was not in what she brought into the city. It was what she took out. After the Count's death, a ship departed from Galata bound for Marseille, its cargo marked as antique textiles. Among them, the missing consular records, the proof of her husband's crimes. She meant to deliver them to her confederates abroad, but before she could, Madame Vassiliev intervened. The fire, the forged letters, the thefts, all her attempts to keep those secrets from ever reaching the world. Arda stared at him. So both women were guilty. "Oui, but of different sins," Poirot said quietly. Madame Vassiliev killed to preserve memory. Lady Faversham killed to bury it. Each woman was the mirror of the other, both haunted by the same man, the same betrayal. The order was their bond and their curse. He picked up the locket next. And this? This was the cruelest lie of all. The portrait inside does not show love as we believed, it shows allegiance. Look closely, Inspector. The background behind the Count's image bears a faint emblem, almost erased by fire. The insignia of the Order of the Falcon. Madame Vassiliev had been more than a housekeeper, more even than a survivor. She was its priestess, her daughter, her acolyte. Together they swore to guard what their men had destroyed. Yet, in the end, it was Lady Faversham who rose to lead them, turning the order towards self-preservation rather than remembrance. Arda shook his head slowly. "You mean to say she commanded them?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Commanded? No. Manipulated. When Madame Vassiliev confessed to murder, she did so believing herself the final instrument of vengeance. She never realized she had been a pawn, guided by gentle words and half-truths from the woman she thought her sister in grief. Lady Faversham orchestrated every death, not to avenge, but to erase anyone who could trace the Order's surviving members to her husband's crimes. She turned confession into art, guilt into theatre. Arda exhaled, and when she saw it closing in, she wrote her own ending, Poirot finished softly. One final act of control, to die by her own hand rather than face the exposure she'd spent her life concealing. But, he raised a finger, his eyes glinting. There is one thing even she did not plan for. Arda looked wary. And what is that? Poirot's gaze moved toward the window, where the morning sun had begun to pierce the veil of mist over the sea. The message. The one you seek still walks free. It came too late for her to have sent it. She was already under guard. Which means, Inspector, there is still one ghost we have not named. Ada's eyes narrowed. You think someone else survived? Another member? Poirot nodded. We, the man who forged the letters that condemned Sergei Volkova, the man whose signature we found only in fragments, the consul's deputy. He vanished after the scandal. I believe he never left the city. He changed his name, took a quiet post in the police, and has been watching ever since. Ada froze. You can't mean... Poirot turned to him, his gaze heavy with pity. Ah, mon ami, I am sorry. It was your own deputy, the man you trusted, he who always arrived a little too late, who handled the evidence with such care, who ensured that every key, every record passed through his hands. It was he who slipped the poison to Madame Vassiliev, he who delivered her final note, a faithful servant still obeying the command of a dead mistress. Ada's face went pale. But he's gone. He resigned this morning, left a letter. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, I imagine it said something of gratitude, of service, perhaps even regret, but no apology. Men like him do not repent. They vanish, leaving their masters to take the blame. For a long while neither spoke. The murmur of the hotel drifted faintly through the walls. Distant voices, the creak of the old floorboards, the quiet life of a building returning to normal. Poirot's gaze remained on the window. So you see, Inspector, justice is not a simple thing. It does not always wear the robes of law. Sometimes it hides its face behind mercy, or love, or loyalty. And sometimes, he sighed softly, sometimes it escapes entirely. Ada sank into a chair, his voice heavy. And you? What will you tell the courts? The truth, Poirot said simply. Or enough of it to quiet the city. Lady Faversham will bear the guilt. The people must have their closure. As for the rest... He shrugged delicately. The ghosts of Constantinople will keep their secrets a little longer. He gathered the relics of the case, the feather, the locket, the seal, and placed them carefully back into their box. As he closed the lid, the faint scent of lavender rose once more into the air. Poirot smiled faintly. Do you smell it, Inspector? Even now she lingers. The scent of the past, sweet, sorrowful, impossible to forget. He walked to the window and looked out upon the glittering water. A single ship was departing from the harbour, its sails catching the wind. Perhaps, he murmured, on that ship sails a man with grey hair and clever eyes, who once called himself a friend of justice. Perhaps he looks back upon this city and thinks, as I do, that justice is never truly served, only balanced, for a moment, before it tips again. Ada joined him, following his gaze toward the horizon. Do you think he'll return? Poirot's smile was sad, knowing. The past always returns, my friend. It is only the living who forget. Outside, the ship disappeared slowly into the pale mist. The city stirred to life once more, unaware perhaps that in its quiet heart one final secret still walked free beneath the morning sun. The city had returned to its rhythm, or so it seemed. The headlines had faded from the morning papers, the gossip had moved on to newer scandals, and the Pera Palace once again hummed with the ordinary music of polished floors, ringing bells and hushed conversation. But for Hercule Poirot, the music felt ever so slightly out of tune. He had closed many cases before, walked away from many tragedies that seemed, at last, to find their rest. But this one refused to lie still. It was late afternoon when he descended the grand staircase for the final time. His luggage waited by the door and Inspector Ada stood beside it, his uniform pressed, his eyes tired but grateful. You've given this city peace, monsieur, he said, his tone carrying both admiration and relief. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, peace, yes. But peace, my friend, is a most deceptive perfume. It lingers, it comforts, and then, when you breathe too deeply, you find it masks something less pleasant beneath. Ada chuckled wearily. You can rest now. The case is done. The city will remember this as one of your triumphs. Poirot adjusted his hat. I do not measure triumphs in headlines, Inspector, only in truth. They shook hands warmly, the kind of handshake that carries respect between two men who have seen too much. Poirot stepped into the waiting carriage. and as it rolled away through the crowded streets he gazed out upon the city that glimmered under the descending sun. Minarets stretched toward the sky, seagulls circled over the Golden Horn, and the scent of salt and spices mingled in the air like a memory. Yet his mind was not at rest. The final puzzle piece, the deputy's disappearance, troubled him like a discordant note in an otherwise perfect melody. He had watched ships leave the harbour, had read the manifest Ada sent him that morning, and something had caught his eye. One of the departing vessels bore not the name of any known shipping line, but a curious designation in Cyrillic. Falcon's Grace. A coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps not. He leaned back in his seat, fingers tapping the handle of his cane. Ah, he murmured to himself. Even the cleverest spiders sometimes leave a single strand uncut. The carriage rattled along the cobblestones and stopped briefly at a junction, where the narrow street met the waterfront. Through the open window, Poirot glimpsed a familiar figure, a man in a dark coat standing beside a fruit cart, his face half hidden by shadow. He was reading a newspaper, nothing unusual save for the peculiar tilt of his head and the faint scar along his jaw. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He had seen that face once before, though at the time it had been clean-shaven and younger. The photograph attached to the missing personnel file from the old consulate. "Driver," Poirot said sharply, leaning forward. "Wait." But when he looked again, the man was gone. The fruit seller stood alone, bewildered, asking if monsieur wished to buy figs. Poirot hesitated, then smiled faintly and waved him off. "No, thank you, my friend. I find I have lost my appetite." The carriage rolled on, crossing the Galata Bridge as the light shifted to amber. The sea below shimmered, reflecting 1,000 colours, gold, red, violet. Poirot thought of the letter Madame Vassiev had written before her death, the one no one had seen but him. He remembered the single line beneath her trembling signature. "Forgive him. He was only doing what I could not." At the time, he had taken it to mean the deputy, the loyal servant who continued her work. But what if the him was someone else entirely? Poirot frowned, tracing the logic backward through the tangled web of deceit. The Order of the Falcon had survived through generations of secrecy, hidden behind noble names and innocent trades. If the deputy had indeed fled, someone had arranged his passage, falsified his records, erased his trace. Such precision required more than loyalty. It required command. "Ah," Poirot whispered, "so the game continues." The driver glanced back. "Did monsieur speak?" "Non, non," Poirot said softly. "Merely to myself." They reached the port where his ship to Athens awaited. The docks were alive with movement. Crates lifted, ropes hauled, sailors calling to one another in a dozen languages. Poirot stepped down, his shoes clicking softly on the wet planks. He turned once to look back at the city. It glowed in the twilight, both ancient and eternal, every stone whispering the weight of centuries. He handed his luggage to the porter and began to ascend the gangplank. The captain greeted him with a polite nod, but Poirot's attention was drawn to a small envelope resting atop his cabin berth. It bore no name, only a seal pressed in red wax, the same falcon emblem he had last seen burned into the locket. For a moment he stood motionless. The ship's whistle sounded deep and resonant, echoing across the water. Poirot broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was delicate, familiar. "Monsieur Poirot, you see everything, yet not all things are meant to be seen. The order does not die, it changes its form as faith changes with the centuries. When next you hear the name of the Falcon, remember that it has never been an emblem of revenge but of endurance. A friend." He read it twice, then folded it neatly and slipped it into his breast pocket. A friend. Such words, he thought, could mean many things: a warning, a confession, or an invitation. As the ship pulled away from the dock, Poirot stood at the railing, his eyes fixed on the skyline. The domes and spires of Constantinople shimmered in the last light, fading slowly into shadow. The wind carried the faint call to prayer from a distant minaret, solemn and haunting. Ada's words returned to him. "You've given this city peace." "Peace," Poirot murmured. "Yes, but peace born of silence, not of truth." He closed his eyes for a moment. letting the salt wind brush against his face. Behind him, the deck was empty. Before him, the horizon stretched wide and waiting. Somewhere, far beyond the darkening waters, the falcon still moved, perhaps in the guise of a merchant, a diplomat, a priest, perhaps even in the guise of justice itself. He straightened his coat and turned toward his cabin. On the table inside lay a single white feather, resting where the letter had been. No one had entered since he arrived. Poirot smiled faintly, almost affectionately. "Ah," he whispered, "you are clever, mes amis, but you forget. So am I." He lifted the feather and placed it inside his notebook, closing the cover with care. Then he sat by the window, watching the dark waves ripple beneath the moonlight. The ship moved steadily onward, its lanterns glowing against the sea, and though Poirot said nothing more, his eyes remained open long into the night, tracing unseen patterns across the water, patterns only he could follow, and that perhaps, one day soon, would lead him once again into the shadow of a mystery that refused to die.